They walked into the courthouse like they owned the pavement beneath their feet. Preston Caldwell in a $5,000 Italian suit, and Jessica, his 24-year-old mistress, clinging to his arm like a trophy he couldn't wait to display. Preston thought this divorce was a formality. He thought his wife, Samantha, was just a broken woman who would sign the papers for pennies just to escape his torment. He was wrong. He didn't know that, while he was busy hiding assets in the Caymans, Samantha wasn't crying. She was recruiting. And she hadn't just hired any lawyer. She had hired the one man Judge Thornton feared and respected above all others, the man who taught the judge everything he knew. The hunter was about to become the prey. The polished oak doors of the Superior Court of Manhattan swung open, and the atmosphere in the hallway shifted perceptibly. Preston Caldwell checked his reflection in the glass of a framed portrait of a long-dead justice, smoothing back his silver-streaked hair. He was the picture of mid-50s vitality, a man who had made millions in commercial real estate by crushing competitors and cutting corners. Beside him, Jessica adjusted the strap of her designer handbag, her heels clicking a sharp, staccato rhythm on the marble floor. She wore a dress that was perhaps a shade too bold for family court, a vibrant crimson that screamed for attention. "Are you sure this is going to be quick, baby?" Jessica whispered, chewing on her lower lip. "You promised we'd be in Paris by Friday." Preston chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that vibrated in his chest. He patted her hand condescendingly. "Relax, sweetheart. Samantha doesn't have the stomach for a fight. She's been living off my allowance for 20 years. She'll take the settlement offer, cry a little bit about the house, and then she'll fade away into obscurity. I've got the best forensic accountants in the city burying the real money. She'll get the crumbs I choose to leave her." He checked his watch, a limited edition Patek Philippe that cost more than most people's homes. 8:55 a.m. "Besides," Preston added, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper as they approached the double doors of Courtroom 4B. "My lawyer, Gerald, plays golf with Judge Thornton every other Sunday. The fix isn't in, per se, but let's just say the field is tilted in our favor." Gerald Fitzsimmons, Preston's attorney, was already waiting by the defense table. He was a weasel of a man with slicked-back hair and a nervous smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He looked up as Preston approached, but instead of the usual confident nod, Gerald looked pale. He was sweating, despite the aggressive air conditioning of the courthouse. "Preston," Gerald hissed, stepping away from the table to intercept his client. "You brought her? Into the courtroom?" Preston shrugged, guiding Jessica to a seat in the gallery directly behind the defense table. "Why not? Samantha needs to see that I've moved on. It's a power move, Gerald. Psychology 101. Show the enemy you have zero fear." "It's not about fear," Gerald whispered urgently, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. "It's about decorum. Judge Thornton is old school. He hates— Thornton will get over it," Preston snapped. "Now where is my soon-to-be ex-wife? I want to get this over with before lunch." As if summoned, the heavy doors opened again. But it wasn't the entrance Preston expected. He expected Samantha to walk in with her head down, wearing one of those drab grey cardigans she had favored in the last few miserable years of their marriage. He expected her to look tired, defeated, and accompanied by the cheap strip mall lawyer she had retained initially, a guy named Rick who mostly handled DUIs. Instead, the room went silent. Samantha Caldwell walked in. She was wearing a tailored navy pantsuit that fit her perfectly, her hair cut into a sharp, confident bob. Her posture was erect, her chin high. She didn't look at Preston. She didn't look at Jessica. She looked straight ahead at the judge's bench with a terrifying serenity. But it was the man walking beside her who sucked the oxygen out of the room. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a shock of white hair and a beard that made him look like an Old Testament prophet, dressed in Savile Row tailoring. He carried a battered leather briefcase that looked like it had survived a war. He walked with a slight limp, relying on a cane with a silver handle in the shape of a wolf's head. Preston felt Gerald stiffen beside him. He heard his lawyer gasp, a sound like a balloon rapidly losing air. "What?" Preston demanded, annoyed by his lawyer's sudden paralysis. "Who is the old cripple?" Gerald turned to Preston, his eyes wide with genuine terror. "That's not a cripple, Preston. That's Nathaniel Cross." Preston frowned. "I don't know the name. Is he good?" "Good?" Gerald laughed, a high-pitched, hysterical sound. "He hasn't practiced in 5 years. He retired after the monolithic State versus Blackwood case. He's a legend, Preston. They call him the Architect. He doesn't just win cases. He dismantles people's lives brick by brick." Preston scoffed, though a seed of unease planted itself in his gut. "He's an old man. You're in your prime, Gerald. Don't let a reputation spook you." "You don't understand," Gerald whispered, his voice trembling. "Judge Thornton. Before he was a judge, he was a junior associate at Cross's firm. Nathaniel Cross isn't just a lawyer. He's the man who taught Thornton how to read the law." The bailiff's voice boomed. "All rise. The Honorable Judge William Thornton presiding." Judge Thornton swept into the room, his black robes billowing. He was a stern man, known for his no-nonsense attitude and his impatience with theatrics. He took his seat, adjusted his glasses, and looked down at the docket. Case number 4921, Caldwell versus Caldwell, Divorce Proceedings and Asset Division. Thornton looked at the defense table. He nodded politely at Gerald. "Mr. Fitzsimmons, good to see you." "And you, Your Honor," Gerald squeaked, clearing his throat to find his deeper, courtroom voice. "Ready to proceed." Then Judge Thornton turned his gaze to the plaintiff's table. He stopped. His eyes widened slightly behind his spectacles. The pen in his hand froze mid-air. "Mr. Cross," the judge said, his voice losing its authoritative boom and softening into something resembling awe. "Is that you?" Nathaniel Cross stood up slowly. He didn't rush. He buttoned his jacket with deliberate care and leaned on his cane. "It is, Your Honor. I have come out of retirement specifically to represent Mrs. Samantha Caldwell in this matter." The judge sat back, a small, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. "I see. It has been a long time, Nathaniel." "Too long, William," Cross replied. The use of the judge's first name sent a ripple of shock through the gallery. In any other circumstance, it would be contempt. Here, it sounded like a benediction. Preston leaned over to Gerald. "Object to something," he hissed. "They're too friendly. Conflict of interest." "Shut up," Gerald whispered back violently. "If I object to their friendship now, I insult the judge. We have to sit still." "Your Honor," Gerald stood up, trying to regain control. "We have prepared a generous settlement offer for Mrs. Caldwell. We believe we can resolve this without dragging the court through a lengthy trial. Mr. Caldwell is offering the marital home, a cash sum of $2 million, and spousal support for 5 years. It is more than fair given the prenuptial agreement." Judge Thornton looked at Cross. "Counsel?" Nathaniel Cross didn't even look at his papers. He looked directly at Preston Caldwell. His eyes were pale blue, cold and piercing. Preston felt like he was being scanned by an X-ray machine that could see every dirty deal he'd ever made. "Your Honor," Cross began, his voice a rich baritone that filled the room without the need for a microphone. "The defense speaks of fairness. They speak of a prenuptial agreement signed 25 years ago by a young woman who was told by her fiancé that it was standard procedure, while withholding the fact that his assets were already being funneled into offshore shell companies. "Objection!" Gerald shouted. "Conjecture!" "I am merely opening, Mr. Fitzsimmons," Cross said calmly, not even turning his head. "We are not interested in the settlement offer. We are not interested in the crumbs Mr. Caldwell deigns to sweep off his table." Preston stiffened. Crumbs. The exact word he had used to Jessica in the hallway. How could he know? Cross continued, walking slowly toward the center of the room. "We are filing a motion to freeze all assets held by Mr. Caldwell, including those under the entities Blue Horizon LLC in Nevada, Apex Holdings in the Cayman Islands, and most interestingly, the account recently opened in the name of Miss Jessica LaRue." In the gallery, Jessica audibly gasped. Preston whipped his head around, his face draining of color. "That's a lie!" Preston shouted, standing up. "I don't have accounts in her name." "Sit down, Mr. Caldwell," Judge Thornton barked, slamming his gavel. "One more outburst and I will hold you in contempt. Mr. Cross, those are serious allegations. Do you have proof?" Cross smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a wolf standing over a trapped lamb. "Your Honor, I have the bank routing numbers, the wire transfer timestamps, and the surveillance footage of Mr. Caldwell entering the First National Bank with Miss LaRue on 4 separate occasions last month. But that is just the appetizer." Cross turned to Samantha, who sat stoically at the table. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "We are not here for a settlement, Your Honor. We are here to prove that Mr. Caldwell has engaged in a decade-long conspiracy of fraud, embezzlement, and emotional abuse. We are asking for full dissolution of the prenup on the grounds of fraudulent inducement, and we are seeking 80% of the marital estate." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. 80% was unheard of. It was a declaration of war. During the recess, Preston dragged Gerald into a private conference room. He was furious, his face a mottled red. "How did he know about the account for Jessica?" Preston screamed, kicking a chair across the room. "That was airtight. I set that up through 3 different shell companies." Gerald was pacing, wringing his hands. "I told you, Preston, Nathaniel Cross isn't a normal lawyer. He used to work for the Department of Justice before he went private. He has connections with forensic accountants that the FBI wishes they could hire. If he has the routing numbers, he has everything." "Then fix it," Preston yelled. "You're supposed to be the shark here." "I'm a shark in a swimming pool, Preston. Cross is a leviathan from the deep ocean. You don't understand the history." Gerald stopped pacing and looked at his client. 30 years ago, Judge Thornton was accused of professional misconduct. It was a setup, a political hit job to stop him from becoming a judge. Everyone abandoned him. His firm fired him. His wife left him. The only person who stood by him was Nathaniel Cross. Cross took the case pro bono, proved Thornton's innocence, and destroyed the careers of the men who set him up. Thornton owes Cross his life, his career, his reputation. You cannot win a credibility war against Cross in Thornton's courtroom. Preston slumped into a chair, the adrenaline fading into a cold dread. He thought of Samantha. Quiet, dutiful Samantha. She had spent 20 years organizing his dinner parties, raising their daughter who was now away at college, and ignoring the lipstick stains on his collars. "She never fought back," Preston muttered. "Why now?" "Because you got sloppy," Gerald said bluntly. "Bringing the mistress to court, that was the final insult. You pushed her into a corner, and she found the biggest stick she could find." There was a knock on the door. A bailiff peeked in. "Court is resuming in 5 minutes." Preston stood up, buttoning his jacket. "Okay. We change tactics. If we can't beat them on the money, We destroy her character. Samantha has skeletons. She had that bout of depression 5 years ago. Maybe she's mentally unstable, unfit to manage assets. Gerald looked at him with disbelief. You want to attack the mental health of a woman you cheated on in front of a judge who values loyalty above all else? Do it, Preston snarled. I'm not losing my empire to that woman. Back in the courtroom, the atmosphere had thickened. Samantha was no longer looking at the judge. She was looking at Preston. For the first time in years, he met her eyes. He expected to see anger. Instead, he saw pity. It infuriated him. Mr. Fitzsimmons, you may call your first witness, Judge Thornton said. Gerald stood up, looking reluctant. The defense calls Mr. Preston Caldwell to the stand. Preston walked to the stand, confident in his ability to charm. He had charmed investors, zoning boards, and women his whole life. This was just another sale. Mr. Caldwell, Gerald began, please describe the state of your marriage over the last 5 years. Preston sighed theatrically. It's been tragic, really. I've tried to be supportive, but Samantha, she struggles. She has severe mood swings. She spends days in bed. I've had to take over all the household finances just to keep us afloat because she would forget to pay bills. I felt trapped. Jessica was a mistake, yes, but she was a source of light in a very dark home. He looked toward the gallery at Jessica, offering a sad, repentant smile. Then he looked at the judge. I only want what is fair. I want to ensure Samantha is cared for, but I don't believe she is capable of managing a large estate. Gerald nodded. Thank you. No further questions. Judge Thornton turned to the plaintiff's table. Mr. Cross? Nathaniel Cross didn't stand up immediately. He rifled through a stack of papers, humming a tuneless melody that the microphone picked up. It was maddeningly disrespectful, yet the judge said nothing. Finally, Cross stood. He picked up a single piece of paper. Mr. Caldwell, Cross said, walking to the stand. You claim my client was unable to manage finances due to her mental state? Yes, Preston said smoothly. She was often confused. Confused? Cross repeated. Interesting, because according to the records from the board of the Caldwell Charity Foundation, of which you are the chairman, Mrs. Caldwell has been the acting treasurer for the last 7 years. Is that correct? Preston blinked. He had forgotten about the charity tax shelter. Well, in title, yes, but I did the work. Did you? Cross pulled out a document. This is a forensic audit of the Foundation's emails. It shows 4,000 emails sent by Mrs. Caldwell over the last 3 years, directing funds, organizing galas, and balancing the books. In fact, on the dates you claim she was in bed for days, she was actually negotiating a vendor contract that saved your foundation $40,000. Were you aware of that? I might have misremembered the dates, Preston stammered. Let's talk about dates, Cross said, his voice hardening. You claimed you took over household finances because she forgot to pay bills. Yet, here I have a credit card statement for a Mr. Preston Caldwell, dated October 14th. It shows a charge of $12,000 at the Sapphire Club. Can you tell the court what the Sapphire Club is? Preston's throat went dry. It was a high-end gentleman's club in Vegas. It's a restaurant, Preston lied. A restaurant, Cross deadpanned. He turned to the judge. Your Honor, I have here a sworn affidavit from the manager of the Sapphire Club, confirming that Mr. Caldwell is a Diamond member and that the charge on October 14th was for a private party involving 3 entertainers. The gallery murmured. Jessica, in the back, looked down at her lap her face burning. "Is this how you were caring for your mentally fragile wife, Mr. Caldwell?" Cross asked, his voice rising like a thunderclap. "By spending her household budget on strippers in Las Vegas while she was at home balancing your charity's books?" "It was a business meeting," Preston shouted, losing his cool. "You don't understand how business works." "I understand business perfectly," Cross replied icily. "And I understand that perjury is a crime. But let's move on. You mentioned Miss LaRue was a source of light. When exactly did this light enter your life?" "About 6 months ago," Preston said, trying to regain his footing. Cross walked back to his table and picked up a thick envelope. He didn't open it. He just held it up. "Mr. Caldwell, I want you to think very carefully before you answer. I have here the flight manifests for your private jet, the Golden Eagle. If I open this envelope, will I find Miss LaRue's name on a manifest dated 3 years ago for a trip to Aspen?" Preston froze. 3 years ago. He had met Jessica when she was an intern. He had taken her on a ski trip and told Samantha he was at a conference in Denver. If he admitted it, he proved he was a liar about the timeline. If he denied it and Cross opened the envelope, he was done for perjury. Preston looked at Gerald. Gerald was staring at the table, refusing to make eye contact. He was on his own. The silence in Courtroom 4B stretched until it became a physical weight pressing down on Preston Caldwell. He stared at the unopened manila envelope in Nathaniel Cross's hand. Beads of sweat broke across his forehead, slicking back his carefully styled hair. He looked toward the gallery. Jessica was chewing her thumbnail so hard it was bleeding. "Well, Mr. Caldwell?" Cross asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Shall I open the envelope, or would you like to amend your previous statement regarding when your relationship with Miss LaRue began?" Preston swallowed hard. He was trapped. If Cross opened that envelope and the manifest was there, he would be charged with perjury right here and now. His empire wouldn't just be divided, it would be incinerated, and he would be watching the flames from a jail cell. I might have been mistaken," Preston croaked, his voice barely audible. "My schedule is very demanding. It's possible. Yes, it's possible Miss LaRue accompanied me on a business trip 3 years ago, as an assistant." "As an assistant," Cross repeated, dripping with disdain. "An assistant you shared a penthouse suite with at the Little Nell Hotel, according to the room service receipts in this same envelope. Receipts that show orders for champagne and caviar at 3 a.m. Cross tossed the envelope onto the defense table. It landed with a heavy thud in front of a paralyzed Gerald Fitzsimmons. "Your Honor," Cross turned to the bench. "We have established that the defendant is a proven liar who has engaged in a long-term affair while gaslighting his wife. Now let us move to the crux of the matter. Where the money went." Cross walked back to his table. Samantha handed him a heavy, leather-bound binder. He didn't open it immediately. He rested his hand on it, as if drawing power from its contents. "Mr. Caldwell, you made your fortune in commercial real estate redevelopment. Your business model involves buying distressed properties, setting up individual LLCs for each project, developing them, and then selling them off. Is that correct?" "Yes," Preston said, trying to regain some shred of dignity. "It's standard industry practice to limit liability." "Indeed. It is also," Cross said, opening the binder, "a fantastic way to hide liquid assets during a divorce if one is morally bankrupt. Let's talk about the Aurora project." Preston flinched. The Aurora project was supposed to be his masterpiece, a massive mixed-use development in downtown. It had also been a spectacular financial failure 2 years ago, or so he had told his shareholders and his wife. The Aurora project went bankrupt, Preston said quickly. A terrible loss. Samantha knows this. We almost lost the house because of it. Samantha, sitting at the plaintiff's table, finally spoke. Her voice was clear, calm, and devastating. No, Preston. You told me we almost lost the house. I just signed the refinancing papers you put in front of me because I trusted you. Judge Thornton looked at Samantha with a flicker of deep sympathy before turning a gaze of granite back to Preston. The Aurora project did declare bankruptcy, Cross continued, pulling a complex flow chart from the binder and having the bailiff put it on the overhead projector. But look at this. Just 3 weeks before the bankruptcy filing, the parent company, Caldwell Development, transferred $15 million in consulting fees to a company called Nevis Solutions, located in the Caribbean. Cross pointed a gnarled finger at the screen. And who is the sole signatory for Nevis Solutions? Preston stared at the screen. He had paid a fortune to hide that connection. The lawyers in Nevis assured him it was impenetrable. Cross answered his own question. It isn't you, Mr. Caldwell. You're too smart for that. No, the sole signatory is a man named Marcus Thorne, your college roommate. The man who was the best man at your wedding to Samantha. Preston felt the room spinning. Marcus had sworn secrecy. Marcus was on the payroll for $50,000 a month, just to keep his mouth shut and sign papers. We deposed Mr. Thorne yesterday in Miami, Cross said casually, dropping another bomb. It's amazing how quickly loyalty dissolves when faced with federal wire fraud charges. Mr. Thorne admitted that Nevis Solutions is nothing but a pass-through entity. The $15 million didn't stay there. It was routed back into the United States, into a blind trust. So what? Preston tried to bluff, though his voice shook. You can't pierce a blind trust. Cross smiled, that terrible, wolfish smile again. Look at the beneficiary of the trust, Mr. Caldwell. Cross flipped a page in the binder and held it up. It was a document signed in Preston's distinctive, flamboyant handwriting. The beneficiary wasn't Preston. It wasn't Jessica. It wasn't even his daughter. It was the Samantha Caldwell Revocable Trust. The courtroom went dead silent. Even Judge Thornton leaned forward, confused. You see, Your Honor, Cross said softly. Mr. Caldwell is a narcissist, but he's also paranoid. He knew if he put the money in his own name, it could be seized by creditors from the Aurora bankruptcy. He couldn't trust his mistress. So, he put it in the one place he thought no one would ever look, a trust in his wife's name that he forged her signature to create, and to which only he held the power of attorney to withdraw funds. Cross turned to Samantha. Mrs. Caldwell, did you know you were worth $15 million hidden in a blind trust? I had no idea, Samantha said, her eyes locking onto Preston's with profound disgust. Until I found the burner phone hidden in his golf bag. Preston gasped. The phone. He had lost it 6 months ago. He thought he left it in a cab in Chicago. You stole my property, Preston sputtered. She secured evidence of felony fraud, Cross corrected thunderously. She found the phone. She guessed the passcode. Your birthday. How unoriginal. And she read the texts to Marcus Thorne, directing the transfers. She brought that phone to me. That is why we are here, Mr. Caldwell. Your wife isn't the fragile flower you painted her to be. She has been dismantling your life from the inside out for half a year, while you were busy ordering caviar with your mistress. Gerald Fitzsimmons looked ready to faint. He was furiously whispering to Preston, urging him to take the fifth, to demand a recess, to feign a heart attack. Anything to stop the bleeding. But Judge Thornton was relentless. Mr. Cross, you may continue. Thank you, Your Honor. The plaintiff calls Ms. Jessica LaRue to the stand. The color drained from Jessica's face completely. She looked panicked at Preston, begging him with her eyes to stop this. Preston just stared straight ahead. His jaw clenched so hard, a muscle twitched in his cheek. He was already figuring out how to blame her for the Aspen manifest. Jessica stood up shakily. The vibrant red dress now seemed cheap, a costume for a role she no longer wanted to play. She walked to the stand, took the oath, and sat down, looking tiny in the large wooden chair. Cross approached her gently. Unlike his interrogation of Preston, his demeanor now was that of a disappointed grandfather. Miss LaRue, you are 24 years old, a recent graduate in marketing. Is that correct? Yes, sir. Her voice was a whisper. You met Mr. Caldwell when you interned at his firm 3 years ago. Yes, sir. Did Mr. Caldwell tell you he was happily married? Jessica looked down at her hands. No. He told me his wife was cold, that they hadn't shared a bed in 10 years. He said she didn't understand his ambition. He said they stayed together for appearances. Samantha, at the plaintiff's table, shook her head slightly, a sad smile playing on her lips. It was the oldest lie in the book. Miss LaRue, Cross continued softly. Did Mr. Caldwell ever discuss his financial anxieties with you? Did he ever mention hiding assets? Jessica hesitated. She looked at Preston. He glared back at her, a silent threat in his eyes. Keep your mouth shut or I cut you off. She remembered the apartment he paid for, the car, the clothes. But then she remembered the look on his face 5 minutes ago, when he was ready to let her take the fall for the Aspen trip. She remembered the text messages Cross had just read about the blind trust. He hadn't trusted her with the money either. She was just another accessory, depreciating in value. Miss LaRue, Cross said, his voice hardening slightly. I need to remind you that you are under oath. Perjury is a felony. Mr. Caldwell is already facing severe legal exposure. Do you wish to join him? Tears welled in her eyes. No. No, I don't. Then tell the truth. Did he talk about hiding money? Jessica took a deep breath and sobbed once. Yes. When the Aurora project was crashing, he was frantic. He was drinking a lot. He told me he had to burn it down to save the gold. I didn't know what he meant at first. Did you find out? Jessica nodded, wiping her mascara-stained cheeks. He has a storage unit. In Queens. It's not in his name. It's paid for in cash. Preston slammed his fist on the table. You ungrateful little bitch! Mr. Caldwell, one word more and you are in a holding cell, Judge Thornton roared, rising half out of his chair. The bailiff moved closer to Preston, hand on his taser. The judge glared at Preston until he sank back into his chair, defeated. Thornton then turned back to Jessica, his voice softening. Continue, Miss LaRue. What is in the storage unit? He took me there once, late at night, to drop off some boxes, Jessica sniffled. He said it was his insurance policy. It was full of filing cabinets. And there was a safe in the back corner, a big floor safe. Cross walked back to his table and picked up a set of keys with a distinct, numbered tag. He dangled them in the air. Are these the keys to that unit, Miss LaRue? Her eyes widened. Yes. How did you? Mrs. Caldwell found them taped underneath the drawer of Mr. Caldwell's bedside table 2 months ago, Cross said simply. We secured a warrant for that storage unit this morning, Your Honor. Federal agents are currently cataloguing the contents of that safe. Preliminary reports indicate it contains cash, bearer bonds, and the original, unredacted ledgers for every one of Mr. Caldwell's shell companies going back 15 years. Cross turned to Preston, who looked like a man who had just received a terminal diagnosis. You didn't just hide $15 million from the Aurora project, Preston, Cross said, his voice heavy with judgment. You've been skimming from every project, cheating investors, tax authorities, and your wife for your entire career. The storage unit is the smoking gun, and Miss LaRue just pulled the trigger. No further questions for this witness, Cross said, turning his back on the devastated young woman on the stand. Jessica fled the stand, rushing past Preston without looking at him, and ran out of the courtroom doors, her heels clacking loudly in the stunned silence. The courtroom was silent for a long time after the heavy oak doors swung shut behind Jessica. The air was thick with the wreckage of Preston Caldwell's life. Gerald Fitzsimmons stood up slowly. He looked pale and shrunken. Your Honor, in light of recent developments, the defense requests an immediate recess to confer with our client regarding a change of plea and a potential settlement strategy. It was the white flag. Total surrender. Gerald knew there was no coming back from this. They needed to beg for mercy before the criminal indictment started flying. Judge Thornton took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked exhausted, not with physical fatigue, but with a profound moral weariness. He put his glasses back on and looked down at Preston. Request denied, Mr. Fitzsimmons. Gerald looked shocked. Denied? Your Honor, surely. Sit down, Counselor, Thornton commanded. His voice was low, lacking its usual boom, but it was far more terrifying for its quiet intensity. The judge turned his entire body to face Preston Caldwell directly. Mr. Caldwell, in my 20 years on the bench, I have seen every manner of human failing. I have seen crimes of passion, crimes of desperation, crimes of stupidity, but rarely have I seen such a comprehensive architecture of greed and malice. Preston tried to meet the judge's eyes and failed. He stared at the table, his hands trembling violently. You didn't just cheat on your wife, Thornton continued. You attempted to gaslight her into believing she was insane, while you used her name, the name she took in good faith 25 years ago, to facilitate felony fraud. You brought your mistress into my courtroom as a prop to intimidate a woman whose only crime was trusting you. Thornton paused, leaning forward over the bench. Mr. Cross has done an exemplary job of laying out your financial and marital sins. The law will deal with the asset division, and I assure you, Mrs. Caldwell will receive everything she is entitled to, which, given the fraudulent prenuptial agreement, will be substantial. The federal authorities will deal with the tax evasion and wire fraud stored in that unit in Queens. The judge's voice hitched slightly, a crack in the stone facade. But there is something else, Mr. Caldwell. Something Mr. Cross may not even know, but I do. Nathaniel Cross looked up sharply from his notes, his eyebrows raised in genuine surprise. Samantha looked at her lawyer, then at the judge, confused. You mentioned the Aurora project bankruptcy, Judge Thornton said. You presented it as a business tragedy, a victimless crime of the market. Preston looked up, confusion clouding his panic. It was the market, Your Honor. The Aurora project involved clearing an entire city block of low-income housing to build your glass tower, Thornton said, his voice vibrating with suppressed rage. You used eminent domain loopholes and aggressive eviction tactics to clear those buildings out 3 years before construction even began, just so the land would look better on your prospectus for investors. Preston shrugged weakly. It was business. Tenants were compensated. They were thrown into the street with 30 days' notice. Thornton slammed his hand on the bench, making everyone jump. My mother lived in one of those buildings, Mr. Caldwell. Mrs. Edna Thornton, apartment 4B, the same number as this courtroom. The color drained from Preston's face, so completely he looked like a wax figure. Gerald Fitzsimmons put his head in his hands. She had lived there for 40 years, Thornton continued, his eyes shining with unshed tears of fury. It was her home, her community. The stress of that eviction, the confusion, it broke her. She had a stroke 2 weeks after she was forced out. She died 3 months later in a sterile nursing home because her home, the place that smelled like her cooking and held her memories, was bulldozed to make way for a tower that you bankrupted on purpose to line your pockets. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was horrified. I recused myself from any cases involving your developments back then because of my personal bias, Thornton said. But this is a divorce case, a family law matter. I thought I could be impartial. But I see now that your poison seeps into everything you touch. He looked over at Nathaniel Cross. Mr. Cross, 30 years ago, when my career was hanging by a thread because corrupt men tried to destroy me, you taught me that the law is not just a set of rules. It is a sword to protect the weak from the predations of the strong. You saved me then. And today, by exposing this man, you have allowed me to finally balance the scales for my mother. Cross nodded slowly, a look of profound sorrow and respect on his face. He hadn't known about Edna Thornton. The judge turned back to Preston, his face set in stone. Mr. Fitzsimmons, your request for a recess to negotiate is denied, because there will be no negotiation in this court. I am issuing a summary judgment. He picked up his gavel. It felt heavy in his hand. The prenuptial agreement is hereby declared void ab initio, due to fraudulent inducement. I am awarding Mrs. Samantha Caldwell 100% of the marital assets known to this court. Furthermore, I am granting Mr. Cross's motion to pierce the corporate veil on all of Mr. Caldwell's holdings, the blind trust, the offshore accounts, the hidden caches. They are all now the property of Mrs. Caldwell. Preston let out a strangled cry. You can't do that. That's everything. I'll be destitute. You have your health, Mr. Caldwell, Judge Thornton said coldly. And you have your Italian suits, which you will need, because I am also ordering the bailiff to take you into custody immediately. I am holding you in direct criminal contempt of court for your perjury on the stand regarding your relationship with Miss LaRue, and I am referring the evidence presented here today to the district attorney and the FBI with a strong recommendation for immediate indictment on multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement. The judge raised the gavel high. It is the judgment of this court that you, Preston Caldwell, are morally, financially, and legally bankrupt. Bang! The sound of the gavel echoed like a gunshot. Preston Caldwell slumped over the table, sobbing uncontrollably into his expensive silk tie. Samantha Caldwell stood up slowly. She didn't look triumphant. She just looked free. She turned to Nathaniel Cross and offered him a trembling hand. Thank you, she whispered. Cross took her hand in both of his. The law is a sword, Samantha. You just finally decided to pick it up. As the bailiff hauled a weeping Preston away in cuffs, Nathaniel Cross picked up his battered leather briefcase, nodded to the judge, and walked out of the courtroom, his cane tapping a steady rhythm on the marble floor. The architect had finished his work. The demolition was complete. The holding cell at the Southern District Federal Detention Center did not smell like Italian leather or imported cologne. It smelled of bleach, stale sweat, and despair. Preston Caldwell sat on the thin metal cot, his $5,000 suit stripped away and replaced by a rough, bright orange jumpsuit that chafed against his skin. For the first 48 hours he paced. He screamed for Gerald Fitzsimmons. He demanded to speak to the warden. He threatened lawsuits against the U.S. Marshals, the judge, and the entire judicial system. But as the hours stretched into days and the reality of denied bail settled in, Preston stopped pacing. The silence was the worst part. He was used to the constant noise of deal-making, phones ringing, construction drills, the clinking of crystal glasses. Here, there was only the hum of the fluorescent lights and the occasional clang of a heavy steel door. He had lost. It wasn't just a financial loss, it was an erasure. His reputation, built over 30 years of ruthlessness, had been dismantled in a single morning by an old man with a cane and a wife he had underestimated for 2 decades. 6 months later. The skyline of the city was grey and drizzly, but inside the boardroom of what was formerly Caldwell Development, the atmosphere was electric. Samantha Caldwell stood at the head of the massive mahogany table. She had removed the portrait of Preston that used to hang behind the chair, a vanity piece where he was posed like a conquering general. In its place was a simple, modern painting of the city skyline at sunrise. Around the table sat the remaining board members and executives. They looked nervous. These were men who had laughed at Preston's jokes, signed off on his shady deals, and ignored the moral rot at the company's core. "Gentlemen," Samantha said, her voice calm but commanding. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. She held 80% of the voting shares now. "I have reviewed the quarterly projections for the high-rise luxury condos planned for the West Side." "Yes, Mrs. Caldwell." A nervous VP named Distinctive fidgeted with his tie. "We expect a 30% ROI. The pre-sales are strong." "Cancel it," Samantha said. The room erupted in whispers. "Cancel it." "But the permits, the sunk costs." "I said cancel it," Samantha repeated, her eyes sweeping the room. "We are pivoting. This company spent decades displacing families to build monuments to my ex-husband's ego. That ends today. We are rezoning the West Side lot for mixed-income housing with a focus on community stability." "But the profit margins," the VP stammered. "They'll be razor-thin." "I don't care about the margins," Samantha said, leaning forward. "I have enough money. What I don't have is a clear conscience. We are going to build homes, not tax shelters. And we are going to start by fixing the mess Preston made of the Aurora project." She tapped a file on the table. "I've hired a new lead counsel to oversee this transition. I believe you all know him." The door opened and Nathaniel Cross walked in. He wasn't wearing his courtroom suit today. He wore a tweed jacket and looked more like a university professor. But the way the executives recoiled in their chairs showed that his reputation was still very much intact. "Good morning," Cross rumbled. "I'll be conducting a full compliance audit of every department starting Monday. If you have any skeletons in your closets, I suggest you pack them up and resign by Friday. I am not as forgiving as Mrs. Caldwell." The meeting ended in record time. As the room cleared, Samantha walked over to the window, looking out at the city she was now helping to reshape. "You enjoy scaring them, don't you?" she asked, a small smile playing on her lips. "Fear is a useful tool when applied to the corrupt," Cross replied, joining her at the window. "Have you decided on the name for the new development on the Aurora site?" "Yes," Samantha said softly. "I'm calling it the Edna Housing Initiative." Cross looked at her, his stoic mask slipping for a moment to reveal deep emotion. He knew the name. It was Judge Thornton's mother, the woman whose death had been the catalyst for Preston's downfall. "William will be moved," Cross said quietly. "It is a fine gesture, Samantha. Justice is rarely poetic, but you have made it so." The final act of the drama played out, not in a boardroom, but in the sterile visitation room of the Federal Correctional Institution in Otisville. Samantha sat on one side of the reinforced glass. On the other side sat Preston. He looked 10 years older. His silver hair was yellowing and unkempt. He had lost weight, his face gaunt and hollow. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a desperate, twitchy energy. He picked up the phone. "Samantha." "Sammy. Thank God you came." Samantha picked up her receiver. "Hello, Preston." "You have to get me out of here," Preston whispered hurriedly, his eyes darting around at the guards. "The lawyers, they're incompetent. They want me to plead out to 15 years. 15 years, Sammy. I'll die in here." "You committed serious crimes, Preston," Samantha said, her voice devoid of the pity he was fishing for. "Wire fraud, tax evasion, racketeering. The FBI found the ledgers in the storage unit. There is no way out of this." "But you have the money," Preston pleaded. "You have the assets. You can hire the best defense team. You can pay the restitution. If you pay back the investors, the DA might drop the racketeering charges. Please, for the sake of our past." Samantha looked at him, really looked at him, and realized she felt nothing. The anger was gone. The hurt was gone. There was just a dull surprise that she had ever loved this hollow man. "I am using the assets, Preston," she said. "I'm using them to rebuild the neighborhoods you destroyed. I'm using them to pay back the pension funds you stole from. I'm not spending a dime to keep you out of the cage you built for yourself." Preston's face twisted into a snarl. "You vindictive witch. You're enjoying this. You think you're some kind of saint now? You're living off my work." "I'm cleaning up your mess," she corrected him. "And I didn't come here to negotiate. I came to bring you this." She held up a document against the glass. "Divorce decree?" Preston squinted. "We're already divorced." "This isn't the decree," Samantha said. "This is a letter from our daughter. She asked me to bring it. She doesn't want to visit you. She knows about Jessica. She knows about the lies. She knows you missed her graduation because you were working in the Cayman Islands with your mistress." Preston flinched as if he'd been slapped. She doesn't mean that. You turned her against me. You turned her against yourself, Preston, just like you did with everyone else." Samantha stood up. She smoothed down her skirt. She looked vibrant, healthy and strong, everything Preston was not. "What happened to Jessica?" Preston asked suddenly, a flash of something like jealousy in his eyes. "Did you ruin her too?" "Jessica is working as a waitress in a diner in New Jersey," Samantha said. "She testified against you to avoid jail time. She's starting over. She has nothing, but she has her freedom, which is more than you have." "Samantha, wait." Preston slammed his hand against the glass as she turned to leave. "Don't leave me here. I'm all alone. I have no one." Samantha paused. She looked back over her shoulder, her expression unreadable. "I know the feeling, Preston," she said softly. "I felt that way for 20 years in our marriage. You'll get used to it." She hung up the phone. As she walked out of the prison, the heavy steel gates buzzing open to release her, Samantha Caldwell took a deep breath of the fresh, cold air. The sun was breaking through the clouds. A black sedan was waiting for her. The driver opened the door. "Where to, Miss Caldwell?" Samantha smiled. It was the first time in a long time she didn't have to check a schedule Preston had set for her. "Take me to the construction site," she said. "We have a foundation to pour." As the car pulled away, leaving the prison behind in the rear-view mirror, Samantha didn't look back. She was too busy looking forward to a future that finally, truly, belonged to her. And that is the story of how Preston Caldwell learned the hardest lesson of his life. Never underestimate the quiet ones. He thought his money bought him invincibility, but he forgot that true power doesn't come from a bank account. It comes from the truth. Samantha didn't just win a court case. She reclaimed her identity and used the very fortune that was meant to hide sins to build something beautiful. It's a powerful reminder that justice isn't always swift, and it isn't always loud. But when it arrives, it hits with the force of a freight train. Preston lost his freedom, his family, and his legacy because he believed he was above the consequences. In the end, the fragile wife he ignored was the one holding the keys to his destruction, and the old lawyer he mocked was the architect of his demise. I hope you enjoyed this roller coaster of a courtroom drama. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more stories like this. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. I release new stories every week, covering the wildest dramas, revenge plots, and justice-served moments you won't want to miss. What did you think of Judge Thornton's final ruling? Do you think Preston deserved 15 years, or should he have gotten more? And what about Jessica? Did she get off too easy? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. I read every single one. Thanks for watching. And remember, be careful who you step on or your way up, because you might meet them on your way down. See you in the next video.